My father's face went white as my voice crackled through the courtroom speakers. Calm, steady, professional. As I coordinated a medical evacuation under enemy fire, saving 12 lives that day. 3 years after he banned me from his wedding for embarrassing the family, he was about to learn exactly who his daughter really was. I stood in the back of Blessed Sacrament Church in my dress blues, watching through the crack in the heavy oak doors as my father adjusted his tie at the altar. The late afternoon sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the mahogany pews filled with his new wife's family and friends. People I'd never met. People who mattered more than I did, apparently. The church was magnificent, all soaring ceilings and Gothic architecture that spoke of old money and older traditions. White roses cascaded from every surface, their perfume mixing with the scent of old wood and candle wax. Everything was perfect, orchestrated, immaculate. Just like my father had always demanded from life. Just like I'd never been able to be. The wedding coordinator spotted me first. A thin woman with a clipboard who looked like she'd swallowed something particularly sour. She had that pinched expression of someone used to managing problems, and clearly, I was about to become one. She whispered urgently to someone near the altar, pointing in my direction with barely concealed panic. Within seconds, my half-brother Marcus was striding toward me, his face flushed with anger, and something that looked almost like embarrassment. At 28, Marcus had inherited Dad's political ambitions and Mom's need for social perfection. He worked at a prestigious law firm downtown, drove a BMW his trust fund had bought him, and lived in a Lincoln Park condo that cost more than most people made in 5 years. He'd never served a day in his life, never been deployed, never held a dying soldier in his arms. But somehow he was the good son. "What the hell are you doing here, Riley?" he hissed, positioning himself to block my view of the altar. "Dad made it crystal clear, you're not welcome at this wedding." I didn't move. Couldn't move. After 18 months deployed in Afghanistan, coordinating medical evacuations and leading soldiers through the most dangerous province in the country, I thought maybe things would be different when I came home. Maybe he'd see past the uniform, past the choices that had driven a wedge between us since I was 17, and announced I was enlisting instead of going to Northwestern like he'd planned. "I'm his daughter," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the organ music drifting from the sanctuary. "It's his wedding day." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it, just the bitter sound of someone who'd been rehearsing this conversation for years. "You stopped being his daughter the day you chose that?" He gestured at my uniform with unconcealed disgust. "Over family. Over everything he built for you." The memory hit me like shrapnel, sharp and sudden and devastating. 3 years ago, standing in this same church lobby after Sunday service, still in my civilian clothes but with my enlistment papers burning a hole in my purse. The conversation that changed everything. Asterisk, "Dad, I need to tell you something." Asterisk, "If it's about college applications, Riley, we've discussed this. Northwestern has already accepted you. Your future is set." Asterisk, "I enlisted in the Army." The silence that followed had been deafening. My father, Colonel James Morrison, retired, standing frozen in his perfectly pressed suit, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like grief. Asterisk, "You did what?" Asterisk, "I ship out for basic training in 6 weeks. I want to serve, Dad, like you did." Asterisk, "I served so you wouldn't have to." His voice had echoed off the marble walls, drawing stares from other churchgoers. "I spent 25 years in uniform so my children could have better lives. Safer lives. And you're throwing it all away for what? Some misguided sense of patriotism?" Asterisk, "It's not misguided. It's my choice." Asterisk, "Your choice?" He'd stepped closer, his voice dropping to that deadly quiet tone I remembered from childhood. "Your choice is to break your mother's heart? To humiliate this family? To waste every opportunity I've worked to give you?" Asterisk, "Mom's been dead for 8 years, Dad, and this isn't about you." That's when he'd said it. The words that had haunted me through basic training, through deployment. through 18 months of mortar attacks and medevac flights and nights when I'd wondered if I'd ever see home again. Asterisk. If you walk out that door in that uniform, don't bother coming back. This family doesn't need a soldier. We need a daughter who thinks about more than herself. I'd walked out anyway, and I'd been walking away ever since. Riley. The voice behind me was softer, more careful. My soon-to-be stepmother Linda approached with measured steps, her wedding dress rustling against the marble floor like whispered secrets. Linda Hartwell, soon-to-be Linda Morrison, was everything my father had always wanted in a wife. Elegant, connected, from the right family with the right friends. She organized charity galas and served on the boards of prestigious nonprofits, and she'd never done anything as unseemly as enlist in the military. "Honey, I know this is hard," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of wealthy sympathy that managed to sound both caring and condescending. "But today isn't about past disagreements. It's about David moving forward with his life. Moving forward without me." "He doesn't want you here," Marcus added, his voice getting louder as more guests began to notice the commotion in the lobby. "You made your choice when you decided playing soldier was more important than being part of this family. Do you have any idea what the past 3 years have been like for him? For us?" Playing soldier. The words hit me like a physical blow, and suddenly I wasn't in the church lobby anymore. I was back in Forward Operating Base Chapman, crouched behind a concrete barrier as mortars whistled overhead. I was pressing my hands against Lieutenant Rodriguez's chest, trying to stop the bleeding from the shrapnel that had torn through his body armor. I was screaming coordinates into my radio, calling in the medevac that would save his life and the lives of 11 other soldiers pinned down by enemy fire. I was 23 years old, responsible for the lives of 47 soldiers, and I was damn good at my job. "I saved lives," I whispered, more to myself than to them. "You abandoned yours," Marcus shot back, his face red with anger that seemed disproportionate to the moment. "Dad has spent 3 years explaining to people why his daughter chose war over family. Do you know what that did to him, to his reputation, to us?" "His reputation. Of course. That's what this was really about. Not my safety, not my choices, but how my service reflected on the Morrison family name. How it looked at the country club, at political fundraisers, at the law firm where he worked. The decorated war veteran should have been something to be proud of, but apparently only if you were male and followed the acceptable path." The church doors opened wider, and several guests turned to look at the commotion we were creating. I recognized some faces from my childhood. My father's business partners from his consulting firm, Linda's extended family from Winnetka, people from their country club who'd known me since I was small. All watching, all judging, all probably thinking the same thing Marcus was saying out loud. Mrs. Henderson from next door, who used to give me cookies when I was little. Mr. Carlyle from Dad's old unit, who'd taught me how to salute when I was 6. Linda's sister Margaret, who'd always been polite but distant. They were all there, witnessing my public humiliation, and none of them looked surprised. How long had my father been telling people I was a disappointment? How many conversations had begun with apologies for his wayward daughter who'd chosen military service over a proper career? My father appeared in the doorway of the sanctuary, still in his tuxedo, his face a mask of controlled fury that I recognized from childhood. Colonel James Morrison, retired, former infantry officer turned defense contractor, the man who'd taught me everything I knew about duty and service and honor. The same man who apparently thought those values only applied when they were convenient. At 58, he was still imposing, 6 feet tall, broad shoulders, silver hair perfectly styled, the kind of bearing that commanded respect in boardrooms and social gatherings. He'd transitioned seamlessly from military service to civilian success, building a consulting firm that advised defense contractors and maintaining connections that had made him wealthy and influential. He was everything I'd wanted to make proud, and I was everything that embarrassed him. "Get out," he said simply, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "This is a private ceremony. You weren't invited." The words hit me like a slap. 18 months of combat, of leading soldiers, of making life and death decisions, and I was 8 years old again, being sent to my room for disappointing him. Dad, Don't. His voice cut through me like a blade, sharp and final. You chose your path, Riley. This is mine, and you're not part of it. The words hung in the air like smoke from an explosion, visible and choking, and impossible to ignore. Around us, wedding guests pretended not to stare while absolutely staring, their conversations dropping to whispers as they tried to catch every word of the Morrison family drama unfolding in the church lobby. Linda touched my father's arm gently, probably trying to de-escalate the situation before it became even more of a scene, but his eyes never left mine. There was something in his gaze. Disappointment? Anger? Or maybe just the cold assessment of someone who'd written me off long ago. I deployed to Afghanistan, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I served my country for 18 months. I led soldiers, I saved lives. And you lost your family doing it. He straightened his cufflinks, the same gesture he'd made when dismissing me as a child, when my piano recital wasn't perfect enough, or my grades weren't quite what he'd expected. Some choices have consequences, Riley. Live with yours. The wedding coordinator was practically vibrating with anxiety, looking between my father and me like she was watching a tennis match played with hand grenades. Perhaps we could discuss this after the ceremony. The photographer is waiting, and the guests. She's leaving, my father said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. Aren't you, Riley? I looked around the lobby one more time, taking in every face, every expression, every person who'd chosen to stand by and watch this happen. Ed Marcus, who'd never forgiven me for making choices he was too afraid to make himself, who'd built his entire identity around being the good son who never disappointed anyone. At Linda, who seemed genuinely sad but not surprised, as if she'd been expecting this confrontation and had already chosen her side. At the guests, who'd probably talk about this drama for months at their dinner parties and country club gatherings. And at my father, who'd rather have a perfect wedding than an imperfect daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. He'd spent 25 years in uniform, had trained me to understand duty and sacrifice and service above self. He'd taught me to stand up for what was right, to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, to never back down when principles were at stake. And now he was punishing me for doing exactly that. I straightened to attention, my military-bearing automatic after years of training and deployment. The dress blue uniform I wore represented everything I'd become. The battles I'd fought, the soldiers I'd led, the lives I'd saved. The ribbons on my chest told the story he'd never bothered to ask about. The Combat Action Badge, the Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Army Commendation Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. I saluted. Sharp, precise, respectful. Congratulations on your wedding, sir. He flinched at the formality, and for just a moment, I saw something crack in his composure. But I was already turning away, my heels clicking against the marble floor as I walked toward the exit. Riley, wait! Linda's voice followed me, but I didn't stop. I made it to my rental car before the tears came. 18 months in a war zone, watching friends get wounded, holding dying soldiers, calling in airstrikes that saved American lives. And it was a church lobby in suburban Chicago that finally broke me down completely. I sat in the parking lot, watching through the windshield as the ceremony began without me, and tried to process what had just happened. Through the stained glass windows, I could see the silhouettes of guests taking their seats, the organist beginning the processional, my father waiting at the altar for his new life to begin. A life that didn't include me. My phone buzzed against the dashboard. A text from Captain Williams, my former commanding officer. Hope the wedding went well. Proud of you, Morrison. Always. Your soldiers still talk about you. Hero. I stared at the message for a long time, the words blurring through my tears. Someone was proud of me. Someone saw value in what I'd done, in who I'd become, in the choices I'd made. My soldiers, the men and women I'd led through firefights and convoy attacks, and the daily terror of deployment, they still talked about me. They thought I was a hero. Just not the people who were supposed to matter most. Another text came through, this one from Staff Sergeant Martinez, who'd served under me in Afghanistan. Saw the news about your dad's wedding on social media. Fuck him, LT. We know who you are. Semper Fi, Snux. Then another from Corporal Johnson. Ma'am, you saved my life in Kandahar. If your family can't see what a badass you are, that's their loss. Hoorah. and another from Lieutenant Rodriguez, the same man whose life I'd saved when shrapnel tore through his chest. Morrison, you're the bravest person I know. Military family or not, you're my sister. Always. My soldiers, my brothers and sisters in arms. The people who'd bled with me, fought beside me, trusted me with their lives. They understood. They knew what I'd sacrificed, what I'd given, what I'd become. I started the car and drove away from Blessed Sacrament Church, leaving behind the sound of wedding bells and the sight of my father's new beginning. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay there, watching through windows like a ghost haunting someone else's happiness. 3 months later, I was sitting in a lawyer's office on Michigan Avenue, learning that my father's rejection was about to become very, very public. The discrimination lawsuit I'd filed against his defense contracting firm, the same company that had passed me over for a position I was more than qualified for, citing cultural fit concerns, was moving forward. And the battlefield recording that would change everything, the audio file that captured me coordinating a medevac operation under enemy fire while saving 12 lives, was sitting in a manila folder on the attorney's desk, waiting to tell the truth I'd never been allowed to speak. The law offices of Patterson, Burke and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place where mahogany paneling and leather-bound law books were meant to intimidate rather than inform. I sat in a conference room on the 32nd floor, watching the Chicago skyline stretch toward Lake Michigan, while my attorney, Sarah Chen, organized a stack of documents that would change everything. Sarah was nothing like the military lawyers I'd worked with overseas. She was civilian through and through. Harvard Law, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made opposing counsel nervous. But she understood something about service that most civilians didn't. Maybe because her brother had been killed in Iraq when she was in law school. When I'd first walked into her office 3 months ago, she'd looked at my service record and said simply, "The law offices of Patterson, Burke and Associates occupied 3 floors of a gleaming tower on Michigan Avenue, the kind of place where mahogany paneling and leather-bound law books were meant to intimidate rather than inform." I sat in a conference room on the 32nd floor, watching the Chicago skyline stretch toward Lake Michigan, while my attorney, Sarah Chen, organized a stack of documents that would change everything. Sarah was nothing like the military lawyers I'd worked with overseas. She was civilian through and through. Harvard Law, impeccably dressed, with the kind of sharp intelligence that made opposing counsel nervous. But she understood something about service that most civilians didn't. Maybe because her brother had been killed in Iraq when she was in law school. When I'd first walked into her office 3 months ago, she'd looked at my service record and said simply, "They fucked with the wrong soldier." "The preliminary hearing is set for next Thursday," Sarah said, flipping through a manila folder thick with depositions and evidence. Morrison Defense Solutions tried to get the case dismissed, but Judge Hammond denied their motion. "Your father's company is going to have to answer for why they passed over a Bronze Star recipient for a position she was more than qualified for." Morrison Defense Solutions. My father's company, built on connections he'd made during his military career, had grown into a multi-million-dollar operation, advising defense contractors and managing logistics for overseas operations. The same kind of work I'd been doing in Afghanistan, except I'd been doing it under fire while he did it from air-conditioned offices in downtown Chicago. When I'd applied for a senior logistics coordinator position after my discharge, my qualifications had been perfect. Combat experience, proven leadership, intimate knowledge of military supply chains, and a security clearance that would have saved them months of background checks. I'd led 47 soldiers through 18 months of deployment without losing a single life under my command. I'd coordinated supply drops and medical evacuations in hostile territory. I'd done the job they were hiring for, literally, just with bullets flying overhead. The rejection letter had been polite but devastating. "While we appreciate your military service, we don't feel you would be a good cultural fit for our organization at this time." Cultural fit, the same phrase used to exclude women from boys' clubs, minorities from boardrooms, and apparently daughters from fathers' businesses. "They made a mistake," Sarah continued, pulling out a thick folder marked Personnel Records, Confidential. "When they rejected your application, they had to document their reasoning for the EEOC. The notes from your father's interview process are illuminating. She slid a photocopied page across the polished conference table. The handwriting was my father's, the same precise script I remembered from childhood report cards and birthday cards that stopped coming after I enlisted. R. Morrison, technically qualified but lacks corporate mindset. Military experience may not translate to civilian operations. Potential for conflict given family history. Recommend pass. Family history. He'd rejected his own daughter not because she wasn't qualified, but because hiring me would have meant admitting I'd made the right choice 3 years ago. There's more, Sarah said, her voice carefully neutral. We subpoenaed their hiring records for the past 5 years. Want to guess how many combat veterans they've hired for senior positions? I already knew the answer would hurt. How many? 17, all male, all officers. 3 of them with less combat experience than you, 2 without Bronze Stars, and 1 who never deployed at all but had the right family connections. She leaned back in her leather chair. Your father's company has made a career out of hiring veterans. Just not his own daughter. The conference room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in like the interior of an armored vehicle under fire. I thought about all the times I'd imagined coming home, all the scenarios I'd played out in my head during long nights on deployment. In some of them, my father had been proud. In others, he'd at least been civil. None of them had involved legal action against the company that bore his name. The discrimination case is solid, Sarah continued, but that's just the opening move. Discovery has turned up some interesting connections between Morrison Defense Solutions and several Pentagon contracts your father secured using his military connections. Connections that explicitly exclude companies with, quote, problematic employment practices. She pulled out another folder, this one marked with federal document stamps. If we can prove systematic discrimination against veterans based on gender, several of their government contracts could be in jeopardy. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars in potential liability. The door to the conference room opened, and Sarah's paralegal, David Kim, entered with a cart loaded with boxes. The discovery materials from Morrison Defense Solutions, he announced, setting the first box on the table. Personnel files, email archives, and the audio recordings from their office system. Audio recordings. My pulse quickened. They record everything? I asked. Sarah nodded grimly. Corporate policy. All meetings, all phone calls, all interviews. Supposedly for quality assurance and training purposes, but it's been a goldmine for our case. Including the meeting where they discussed your application. David handed her a digital tablet. The recording from March 15th is already queued up, the one where they discussed rejecting Lieutenant Morrison's application. My hands were steady as Sarah pushed play, but my heart was hammering against my ribs. The audio quality was crystal clear. Voices I recognized from my childhood now discussing me like I was a problem to be managed, rather than a daughter to be welcomed home. My father's voice came through first. Riley's application is on the table. She's qualified on paper, but we need to think about the broader implications of bringing her into the company. Her military record is impressive, another voice said. I recognized it as Thomas Burke, my father's business partner and longtime friend. Bronze Star, combat leadership, security clearance already in place. She could be running our Middle East operations within a year. That's exactly the problem, my father replied. Riley thinks she knows how things work because she's been playing soldier for 3 years. This is a business, not a battlefield. We need people who understand corporate culture, not combat culture. Playing soldier. There it was again. The phrase that reduced 18 months of combat operations to a game, a hobby, something children did in their backyards with toy weapons. The recording continued, my father's voice growing more animated as he explained his reasoning. She made her choice when she enlisted instead of going to college like I planned. She chose adventure over responsibility, combat over family. Now she expects to waltz back into our lives and be rewarded for it? Quote, the optics could be challenging, another voice added. Margaret Hartwell, Linda's sister, who joined the company's board after the wedding, having the CEO's daughter working here, especially with their history, it could create complications. Exactly, my father said. Riley has always been stubborn, always thought she knew better than everyone else. She'd question every decision, challenge every protocol, try to run things like a military operation. That's not what we need here. The words hit me like incoming mortar fire. This wasn't about qualifications or cultural fit. This was about control, about a father who couldn't accept that his daughter had become successful without his approval or guidance. Sarah paused the recording. There's more, but I think you get the picture. They didn't reject you because you weren't qualified. They rejected you because you were too qualified, and because your success in the military made your father uncomfortable. I stared out the conference room window at the city stretching below us. Somewhere out there, my father was probably in another conference room just like this one, making deals and building his empire, never imagining that his own words would come back to destroy everything he'd built. What's the next step? I asked. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it looked genuinely predatory. We go public. Press conference, media interviews, the whole 9 yards. Your father has spent 3 years telling people you're a disappointment. Time to let Chicago know exactly what kind of daughter he really has. She pulled out another folder, this one filled with news clippings and printed emails. I've been in touch with several journalists who specialize in veteran affairs and employment discrimination. They're very interested in your story, especially the military angle. A decorated combat veteran being discriminated against by her own father's defense contracting company? It's the kind of story that goes viral. The idea of going public terrified me more than any firefight I'd been in. In combat, at least you knew who was shooting at you. In the media, attacks could come from anywhere, and civilian casualties were inevitable. What about Linda? I asked. And Marcus? They didn't ask for this. Linda married into it, Sarah replied bluntly. And Marcus works for a law firm that represents several defense contractors. They're both adults who made choices about which side they wanted to be on. Besides, if your father had just hired you based on your qualifications, none of this would be necessary. David wheeled over another box of discovery materials. The email archives are particularly interesting, he said, pulling out a thick folder. Correspondence between James Morrison and several high-ranking Pentagon officials, discussing contract awards and the importance of veteran hiring initiatives. Apparently, your father was very vocal about supporting veteran employment, right up until his own daughter applied for a job. Sarah spread the emails across the conference table like a poker player revealing a winning hand. The correspondence painted a clear picture of hypocrisy. My father publicly advocating for veteran hiring while privately ensuring his own veteran daughter remained unemployed. One email sent to a Pentagon procurement officer just 2 months before my application stood out. Morrison Defense Solutions has always been committed to providing opportunities for our returning heroes. We understand better than most the value that combat experience brings to complex logistics operations, and we're proud to be a leader in veteran employment. He sent this while I was still deployed, I said, recognizing the date. Gets better, Sarah replied, flipping to another email. This one is from last month, to the same Pentagon official. Our veteran hiring initiative continues to be a priority, though we maintain strict standards to ensure all employees can integrate successfully into our corporate culture. The doublespeak was masterful. He was telling Pentagon officials what they wanted to hear, while maintaining plausible deniability for his discriminatory hiring practices. David handed me another folder, this one marked Social Media Analysis. We've also been monitoring online chatter about your father's company and your military service. Turns out several of your fellow veterans have been posting about your situation on military forums and social media. The veteran community is paying attention. I opened the folder to find printed screenshots from Facebook groups, Reddit forums, and Twitter threads. Veterans from my unit, soldiers I'd served with, people who'd never met me but understood what it meant to come home and face discrimination, all sharing their own stories and expressing outrage at my treatment. One post from Staff Sergeant Martinez had been shared over 200 times. LT Morrison saved my life in Kandahar. She's the best officer I ever served under, and if her own family won't hire her, something is seriously fucked up with this country's treatment of veterans. Another from a veteran I didn't recognize. This is exactly why female vets have such a hard time transitioning. We serve our country, come home, and get told we don't fit the culture. Meanwhile, Companies like Morrison Defense Solutions make millions off government contracts supposedly supporting veterans. Where's the support for their daughters? The comment section was filled with similar sentiments, and more importantly, contact information for journalists, veteran advocacy groups, and civil rights organizations that wanted to help. The story is writing itself, Sarah observed. All we have to do is give it a platform. She pulled out a final folder, thicker than all the others combined. But here's what's really going to change everything. We found something in your father's personal files that even I wasn't expecting. The folder was labeled R. Morrison, Personal Correspondence, and contained what looked like years of documentation. Sarah opened it carefully, handling the papers like they were made of glass. Your father has been keeping detailed records of your military service, she said. Not just the official stuff anyone could request, but personal correspondence with your commanding officers, copies of your fitness reports, even transcripts of radio communications from your deployment. My blood ran cold. What? He's been tracking your career, Riley, following your progress, collecting documentation of your achievements, even corresponding with Captain Williams about your performance in Afghanistan. She handed me a letter dated 6 months after my deployment began. This is from Williams to your father, updating him on your leadership during Operation Desert Storm. I read Captain Williams' words with increasing disbelief. James, thought you'd want to know that Riley continues to exceed expectations. Her leadership during yesterday's convoy attack was exemplary. She coordinated a complex medevac operation under fire and saved multiple lives. You should be incredibly proud of her service. My father's reply was attached. Thank you for the update. Please continue to keep me informed of her status and any commendations she receives. He knew, I whispered. He knew everything I was doing, everything I accomplished, and he still publicly disowned you and refused to hire you, Sarah finished. There are dozens of these exchanges, Riley. Your father has been following your military career obsessively, while simultaneously telling everyone that you're a disappointment who abandoned your family. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that for a moment I couldn't breathe. He hadn't just rejected me. He'd been secretly proud of me while publicly destroying me. He'd collected evidence of my achievements, like trophies, while using my absence to justify his disappointment. Sarah handed me another document, this one marked classified audio transcript, but this is the piece de resistance. Remember that medevac operation Captain Williams mentioned, the one where you saved multiple lives under fire? I nodded, the memory still crystal clear, despite the months that had passed. It had been one of the worst days of the deployment. A routine supply convoy that had turned into a nightmare when improvised explosive devices and small arms fire trapped us in a kill zone. 12 soldiers wounded, enemy fire from multiple directions, and me coordinating rescue operations while bullets whispered overhead. The Pentagon recorded everything, Sarah continued. Standard procedure for major operations, radio communications, tactical assessments, after-action reports. And somehow, your father obtained a copy of the audio from that day. She handed me a CD marked with official Pentagon stamps and classification markings. This is your voice, Riley, coordinating that medevac operation, calling in air support, directing medical evacuations, keeping 12 soldiers alive while under enemy fire. It's the most powerful piece of evidence we have. I held the disc in my hands, remembering that day with perfect clarity. The weight of responsibility, the split-second decisions, the absolute focus required to save lives while death whispered around us. It had been the defining moment of my deployment, the day I'd proven to myself and my soldiers that I deserved to wear the uniform. And my father had a recording of it, had listened to his daughter saving lives while telling people she was playing soldier. How did he get this? I asked. Sarah's expression darkened. That's where things get interesting. The Pentagon doesn't just hand out classified audio recordings to civilians, even retired colonels with good connections. Your father either has friends in very high places, or he's been using his company's government contracts to access information he shouldn't have. The implications hit me like a freight train. If my father had been using his business connections to illegally obtain classified military recordings, that wasn't just discrimination, that was a federal crime that could destroy his company and send him to prison. We need to be very careful with this, Sarah continued. But if we can prove your father obtained this recording illegally while using it to track your military service, We're not just talking about employment discrimination anymore. We're talking about unauthorized access to classified information, possible violations of the Espionage Act, and abuse of government contracts. I set the CD down on the conference table, my hands shaking slightly. In 18 months of combat, I'd never felt as overwhelmed as I did in that moment. My father hadn't just rejected me. He'd been conducting surveillance on my military service while building a case against me in his own mind. "There's something else," Sarah said quietly. "Something I found in his personal correspondence that I think you need to see." She handed me a single sheet of paper, a letter written in my father's careful script but never sent. The date at the top was from last month, just 2 weeks after the wedding I'd been banned from attending. Droprit Night Riley. I know you'll probably never read this, and maybe that's for the best. I've been watching your career from a distance, and I need you to know that everything you've accomplished in the military makes me proud in ways I can't express. When I heard about the medevac operation in Kandahar, when Captain Williams told me how you saved 12 lives under fire, I cried. Not from sadness, but from pride so overwhelming I couldn't contain it. I was wrong to dismiss your service as playing soldier. I was wrong to reject you from the company. I was wrong to prioritize my own comfort over your achievements. But I don't know how to fix what I've broken, and my pride won't let me try. You've become everything I hoped you would be, and everything I was too afraid to become myself. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to say that when it mattered. I hope someday you can forgive a stubborn old man who loved you too much to let you see him be proud. Tears taps Sebre Dad. The letter blurred as tears filled my eyes. All this time, all this pain, all this rejection, and he'd been proud of me. Too proud to admit he'd been wrong, too stubborn to bridge the gap he'd created, but proud nonetheless. He never sent it, Sarah said gently, but the fact that he wrote it proves he knew exactly what he was doing when he rejected your job application. This wasn't about qualifications or cultural fit. This was about a father who couldn't admit he'd made a mistake. I folded the letter carefully, my father's words burning themselves into my memory. In a few days, I would be sitting across from him in a courtroom, and this letter would be evidence of his hypocrisy and discrimination. But right now, it was just the words of a broken man who'd let his pride destroy his relationship with his daughter. "What happens next?" I asked. Sarah's smile was razor sharp. "Next week, we play that battlefield recording in open court. We show Chicago exactly what kind of hero James Morrison raised, and exactly what kind of man." The Cook County Courthouse was buzzing with an energy I recognized from pre-combat briefings. That electric tension when everyone knows something significant is about to happen. Media vans lined Federal Plaza, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray October sky like mechanical flowers seeking light. Reporters clutched coffee cups and checked their equipment, while photographers tested their lenses on the courthouse steps. I sat in Sarah's BMW in the underground parking garage, watching the chaos through the security monitors while trying to steady my breathing. In 30 minutes, I would walk into that courtroom and face my father in front of the entire city of Chicago. The battlefield recording that had started as evidence in a discrimination case had become something much more significant, the centerpiece of a federal investigation into illegal acquisition of classified materials. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked, adjusting her navy suit jacket and checking her watch. She'd been preparing for this moment for months, and the predatory gleam in her eyes told me she was about to enjoy every second of what came next. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, though my hands were trembling slightly as I smoothed the ribbons on my dress blue uniform. I'd chosen to wear my military formal uniform deliberately. Every medal, every ribbon, every symbol of the service my father had dismissed as playing soldier. The bronze star with V device gleamed on my chest, along with the Combat Action Badge, the Afghanistan Campaign Medal, and the Army Commendation Medal with oak leaf clusters. Sarah had insisted I wear the uniform. "Let them see exactly what he rejected," she'd said during our final preparation meeting. "Let them see what cultural fit really means in his company." My phone buzzed with a text from Staff Sergeant Martinez. "All of us from the 173rd are watching the live stream. Show them what Army Strong really means, LT. We got your 6. Another from Lieutenant Rodriguez. "Ma'am, whatever happens in there, you saved my life and 11 others. That's all that matters." Hurrah, Nus Traga. The support from my military family had been overwhelming. Social media was flooded with posts from veterans sharing their own stories of discrimination, using hashtags like #VeteranDiscrimination and #ReallyMorrison. The story had gone national, with CNN, Fox News, and MSNBC all covering the case of the decorated combat veteran being rejected by her own father's company. David Kim appeared at the car window, tapping urgently on the glass. Sarah rolled it down, and his excited voice filled the vehicle. "The Pentagon just issued a statement," he said, holding up his phone. "They're launching a formal investigation into how James Morrison obtained classified audio recordings. The Defense Criminal Investigative Service is already en route to Morrison Defense Solutions with a warrant." Sarah's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Looks like your father's problems just got a lot bigger than employment discrimination." We took the elevator to the 15th floor, emerging into a hallway packed with reporters, camera crews, and curious onlookers. The moment the elevator doors opened, camera flashes exploded like artillery fire, and voices started shouting questions. "Lieutenant Morrison, how do you feel about your father's company being raided by federal investigators? Is it true that James Morrison illegally obtained classified Pentagon recordings? What do you want people to know about veteran discrimination?" Sarah had prepared me for this, but the reality was overwhelming. I kept my expression neutral and my shoulders square as we pushed through the crowd toward courtroom 15A. Behind the reporters, I caught glimpses of familiar faces. Veterans in uniform, advocates from military support organizations, and even some former employees of Morrison Defense Solutions who'd come forward with their own stories of discrimination. The courtroom itself was packed beyond capacity. Judge Patricia Hammond had agreed to allow cameras for what had become one of the most watched discrimination cases in recent memory. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table, acutely aware of my father sitting 20 feet away at the defendant's table with his team of high-priced attorneys. He looked older than I remembered, his silver hair more gray than before, his face drawn with the kind of stress that comes from watching your world collapse in real time. When our eyes met briefly, I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Not of me, but of what I represented, of the truth that was about to be spoken in open court. Linda sat in the front row behind him, her face a mask of composed anxiety. Marcus was there too, though he distanced himself from the proceedings after his law firm had quietly suggested he might want to consider other career options given the federal investigation into his stepfather's company. Judge Hammond called the court to order, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd presided over countless cases but recognized this one was different. "We're here today for the matter of Morrison versus Morrison Defense Solutions," she announced. "This case began as an employment discrimination complaint but has evolved to include allegations of unauthorized access to classified materials and systematic discrimination against female veterans. The plaintiff will present her case first." Sarah stood, her opening statement crisp and devastating. She outlined the discrimination case methodically. My qualifications, the company's rejection, the recorded conversations where my father dismissed my service as playing soldier, and the pattern of hiring male veterans while excluding qualified women. But it was when she got to the classified recordings that the courtroom truly fell silent. "Your Honor, we will demonstrate that the defendant not only discriminated against Lieutenant Morrison based on her gender, but that James Morrison used his company's government contracts to illegally obtain classified Pentagon recordings of his daughter's combat operations. He then used this illegally obtained intelligence to track her military career while simultaneously telling the world she was a disappointment to her family." The defense attorney, Jonathan Hartwell, Linda's brother and a high-powered corporate lawyer, objected immediately. "Your Honor, these allegations are speculative and inflammatory. There's no evidence that my client obtained any recordings illegally." Sarah's smile was ice cold. "Your Honor, I'd like to call our first witness. Captain Michael Williams, United States Army, retired." Captain Williams walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a career officer. He'd flown in from Fort Bragg specifically for this testimony, and his presence in the courtroom sent a clear message about how seriously the military community was taking this case. After being sworn in, Sarah began her questioning. "Captain Williams, Did you serve with Lieutenant Morrison in Afghanistan? Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Morrison served under my command for 18 months during Operation Enduring Freedom. Can you describe her performance during that deployment? Williams turned slightly toward the jury, his voice carrying the weight of absolute conviction. Lieutenant Morrison was one of the finest officers I've ever had the privilege to command. She led a logistics platoon of 47 soldiers through some of the most dangerous territory in Afghanistan. Under her leadership, her unit had 0 casualties and maintained a 98% mission success rate. Can you tell us about the medevac operation on March 15, 2022? Williams' expression grew serious. Lieutenant Morrison's convoy came under coordinated attack from insurgent forces. 12 soldiers were wounded and the unit was pinned down in a kill zone with heavy enemy fire from multiple directions. Lieutenant Morrison coordinated a complex rescue operation while under direct fire, ultimately saving the lives of all 12 wounded soldiers. Sarah walked to the evidence table and picked up the CD containing the battlefield recording. Your Honor, I'd like to play the Pentagon recording of that operation. The defense objected again, but Judge Hammond overruled. The recording has been authenticated by the Pentagon and is relevant to the case. You may proceed. The courtroom fell absolutely silent as Sarah inserted the CD into the audio system. When my voice crackled through the speakers, steady and professional, despite the chaos happening around me, I saw several jurors lean forward in their seats. Falcon Base. This is Thunder 6. We have 12 urgent medical evacuations. Grid 41, RQR 123,456,789. Enemy contact from northeast and southwest positions, requesting immediate air support and medevac. Over. The sound of gunfire and explosions was clearly audible in the background, but my voice remained calm and controlled as I continued coordinating the rescue operation. Roger, Thunder 6, Dustoff 7-2 is inbound your position, ETA 15 mics. Be advised, enemy activity in your AO is heavy. Recommend you mark your position with smoke. Over. Copy, Dustoff 7-2. Thunder 6 marking position with green smoke. All friendly personnel are north of smoke marker. Enemy positions are approximately 200 meters northeast and southwest of landing zone. We have wounded who need immediate evacuation, requesting you expedite. Over. The recording continued for 8 minutes, documenting my coordination of air support, medical evacuation, and tactical positioning while under sustained enemy fire. When it ended, the courtroom remained silent for several seconds before Sarah continued her questioning. Captain Williams, in your professional opinion, how would you characterize Lieutenant Morrison's performance during this operation? Exemplary. She demonstrated extraordinary courage, tactical competence, and leadership under the most extreme circumstances possible. Her actions directly saved 12 lives. Did you communicate with James Morrison about his daughter's performance during this operation? Williams nodded. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Morrison had requested that I keep him informed about Lieutenant Morrison's service. I sent him a detailed report about this operation, including the fact that she was being recommended for the Bronze Star with V device for valor. Sarah retrieved a letter from the evidence table. Is this the communication you sent to Mr. Morrison? Williams examined the document. Yes, ma'am. I sent this report 3 days after the operation. Sarah read the letter aloud. James, I wanted to personally inform you that Riley's actions during yesterday's enemy contact were nothing short of heroic. She saved 12 lives while under direct fire and demonstrated the kind of leadership that makes the Army proud. You should know that your daughter is being recommended for the Bronze Star with V device. She's a credit to her family and her country. The impact on the courtroom was immediate. Several jurors glanced toward my father, whose face had gone pale. In the gallery, I could see reporters frantically taking notes while veterans in the audience nodded with recognition and respect. What was Mr. Morrison's response to this communication? Sarah asked. Williams shifted uncomfortably. He thanked me for the information and asked me to continue providing updates on Lieutenant Morrison's service record. Sarah walked back to the evidence table and retrieved a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence. Exhibit 47. Correspondence between James Morrison and Captain Williams, spanning Lieutenant Morrison's entire deployment. As Sarah began reading selected excerpts from the correspondence, a clear picture emerged of my father obsessively tracking my military career while publicly disowning me. Each letter from Captain Williams described my achievements, my leadership, my awards, and commendations. Each response from my father requested more information while expressing what could only be described as pride in my service. The contradiction was devastating, a father secretly celebrating his daughter's heroism while telling everyone else she was playing soldier. But Sarah wasn't finished. She called her next witness, Special Agent Rebecca Torres from the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. Agent Torres had been investigating the illegal acquisition of classified materials for the past month, and her testimony was precise and damning. Agent Torres, did Morrison Defense Solutions have authorized access to the Pentagon recording we just heard? No, ma'am. That recording is classified at the secret level and was not included in any materials that Morrison Defense Solutions was authorized to access through their government contracts. How then would James Morrison have obtained this recording? Our investigation indicates that Mr. Morrison used his personal relationships with Pentagon officials to request materials that were outside the scope of his company's authorized access. He specifically requested audio recordings from his daughter's combat operations, claiming they were needed for contract performance analysis. Sarah paused to let that sink in. So James Morrison lied to Pentagon officials to obtain classified recordings of his daughter's military service? That is correct. Mr. Morrison committed federal crimes by obtaining classified materials under false pretenses and then maintaining possession of those materials without authorization. The defense attorney tried to object, but Agent Torres continued. Furthermore, our investigation has revealed that Mr. Morrison shared these classified materials with other employees of Morrison Defense Solutions, including using excerpts from combat recordings in company presentations to potential clients. A murmur ran through the courtroom. My father hadn't just illegally obtained recordings of my service. He'd been using them for business purposes while publicly dismissing my military career. Sarah called several more witnesses, former employees of Morrison Defense Solutions who testified about the company's discriminatory hiring practices, Pentagon officials who confirmed the illegal nature of my father's requests for classified materials, and veterans who described the impact of being rejected by defense contractors despite their qualifications. Each piece of testimony built an overwhelming case of systematic discrimination, illegal activity, and breathtaking hypocrisy. Finally, Sarah called me to the witness stand. Walking across the courtroom in my dress uniform, with my medals and ribbons representing 18 months of combat service, felt like the longest journey of my life. The witness chair was positioned so I faced the jury directly, but I was acutely aware of my father sitting at the defendant's table, watching every move I made. Sarah's questioning was methodical and devastating. She walked me through my military service, my combat experience, my qualifications for the logistics coordinator position, and the rejection I'd received from my father's company. Lieutenant Morrison, how did it feel to be rejected by your father's company after serving your country in combat? I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. It felt like being punished for doing my duty. I'd spent 18 months leading soldiers, coordinating operations, and serving my country in combat. To come home and be told I wasn't a good cultural fit for a civilian job, doing the same work I'd been doing under fire, it was devastating. Did you know at the time that your father had been tracking your military career? No, ma'am. I believed he had disowned me completely. I thought he viewed my service as a betrayal of his expectations for my life. Sarah handed me the unsent letter my father had written. Have you seen this letter before today? I read my father's words again, feeling the same mixture of heartbreak and anger I'd experienced in Sarah's office. No, ma'am. This is the first time I've seen this letter. How does it make you feel to know that your father was secretly proud of your service while publicly rejecting you? I looked directly at my father for the first time since taking the stand. His eyes were filled with something that looked like regret, but it was too little, too late. It makes me feel like I was betrayed twice, I said quietly. Once when he rejected me for choosing military service, and again when I learned he was proud of me but couldn't find the courage to say so. The cross-examination by the defense was brutal but predictable. They tried to paint me as vindictive, as someone seeking revenge against a father who'd only wanted the best for me. They suggested that my military service had made me unsuitable for civilian employment, that my father's concerns about cultural fit were legitimate. But every attack on my character was undermined by the evidence Sarah had presented. The recordings of my father dismissing my service while secretly tracking it, the illegal acquisition of classified materials, the systematic discrimination against female veterans, none of that could be explained away by concerns about my fitness for civilian employment. When the defense finished their case, Judge Hammond called for closing arguments. Sarah's closing was masterful, weaving together all the evidence into a narrative of discrimination, betrayal, and illegal activity that left no room for doubt about my father's actions. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "this case is about more than employment discrimination, though the evidence of that discrimination is overwhelming. This case is about a father who was so proud of his daughter's military service that he committed federal crimes to obtain recordings of her combat operations, yet so ashamed of his own emotions that he publicly rejected her and denied her employment opportunities she had earned through her service to our country." She gestured toward me, still sitting in my dress uniform with my combat ribbons visible to the entire courtroom. "Lieutenant Morrison saved 12 lives while under enemy fire. She led 47 soldiers through 18 months of combat without losing a single life under her command. She earned the Bronze Star with V device for valor, one of our nation's highest awards for courage in combat. And her own father's response was to deny her a job and tell people she was playing soldier." Sarah walked over to the evidence table and held up the folder containing my father's secret correspondence. But James Morrison knew the truth. He knew his daughter was a hero. He collected evidence of her heroism like trophies, while using her absence to justify his disappointment. He illegally obtained classified recordings of her combat operations, while telling potential employers she lacked the experience for civilian positions. The courtroom was absolutely silent as Sarah delivered her final points. The defendant in this case isn't just James Morrison the businessman, or James Morrison the defense contractor. The defendant is James Morrison the father, who let his pride matter more than his daughter's service, who let his need for control override his love for his child, and who committed federal crimes to possess recordings of the daughter he claimed to have disowned. She turned toward the jury box, her voice rising with conviction. Lieutenant Morrison didn't just serve her country in Afghanistan. She served it with distinction, with courage, and with the kind of selfless leadership that makes America proud. Her father's company makes millions of dollars from government contracts supposedly supporting veterans, while simultaneously discriminating against the most accomplished veteran in his own family. Sarah walked back to our table, her final words ringing through the courtroom. "The evidence is clear, the discrimination is documented, and the illegal activity is proven. Lieutenant Morrison deserves justice. Female veterans deserve protection from discrimination, and James Morrison deserves to face the consequences of his actions." The defense's closing argument was a desperate attempt to reframe the narrative, but after the evidence Sarah had presented, it felt hollow and unconvincing. Judge Hammond sent the jury out for deliberation at 4:17 p.m. Sarah and I retreated to a conference room to wait, but neither of us could sit still. The weight of the moment, the culmination of months of preparation and years of pain, was almost unbearable. At 6:23 p.m., the jury returned. "Have you reached a verdict?" Judge Hammond asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd served in the military, stood up. "We have, Your Honor." "On the count of employment discrimination based on gender, how do you find?" "We find in favor of the plaintiff, Lieutenant Riley Morrison." "On the count of systematic discrimination against female veterans, how do you find?" "We find in favor of the plaintiff." "And what damages do you award?" The foreman consulted his notes. "We award compensatory damages in the amount of $500,000, punitive damages in the amount of $2.5 million, and we recommend that Morrison Defense Solutions be required to implement comprehensive anti-discrimination policies under court supervision." The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits to file their stories. Veterans in the gallery stood and applauded, and camera flashes exploded throughout the room. But I was watching my father. He sat motionless at the defendant's table, his face a mask of devastation, and something that might have been relief. For the first time in 3 years, the truth about our relationship was public. His pride in my service, his discrimination against me, his illegal activities, all of it was now part of the public record. As court was dismissed and people began filing out, my father stood and turned toward me. For a moment, I thought he might approach, might finally say the words that could begin to heal the wounds between us. Instead, he straightened his suit jacket, looked at me one final time, and walked out of the courtroom without a word. But Linda approached me as I gathered my things. Her eyes were red with tears, and her voice was barely audible over the chaos in the courtroom. "Riley, I want you to know, he talks about you all the time. He keeps your medals in his desk drawer, and he watches the news footage of your deployment constantly. He's so proud of you it hurts him, but he doesn't know how to fix what he broke." I looked at her, this woman who'd married into our family dysfunction and somehow still found compassion for all of us. "He had the chance to fix it," I said quietly. "He chose pride instead." Linda nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I know. And I think he knows it too. The federal investigation, the company, his reputation. None of that matters to him as much as losing you does. But he's too stubborn to admit it." Outside the courthouse, the media circus was in full swing. Sarah handled most of the press conference, but the reporters wanted to hear from me directly. "Lieutenant Morrison, what do you want people to take away from this case?" I looked directly into the cameras, thinking about all the veterans watching, all the women who'd been told they didn't fit the culture, all the daughters who'd been rejected by fathers who couldn't admit they were wrong. I want people to know that when you serve your country, when you sacrifice for something bigger than yourself, that service should be honored, not dismissed. Female veterans deserve the same respect and opportunities as their male counterparts, regardless of what their families think about their choices. "What's next for you now?" I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "I'm starting my own company, Morrison Military Consulting. We'll be specializing in logistics coordination and veteran employment services. And unlike some defense contractors, we'll be hiring based on qualifications, not cultural fit. Any message for your father?" I paused, thinking about the letter he'd never sent, the pride he'd never expressed, the love he'd never been brave enough to show. I hope someday he finds the courage to be the father he was when I was growing up, before pride got in the way. But regardless of what he chooses, I know who I am. I'm Lieutenant Riley Morrison, United States Army, Bronze Star recipient, and I saved 12 lives while under enemy fire. That's something no discrimination case can ever take away. 6 months later, Morrison Military Consulting had secured 3 major government contracts and hired 15 veterans, 8 of them women who'd been rejected by other defense contractors for mysterious, quote, cultural fit reasons. My father's company was under federal investigation, had lost several major contracts, and was facing bankruptcy. Marcus had found a new job at a firm that didn't represent defense contractors. Linda had filed for divorce. And I had found something I'd been searching for since I came home from Afghanistan. A place where my service mattered, where my experience was valued, and where being a soldier was something to be proud of rather than something to hide. The battlefield recording that had started as evidence in a discrimination case had become a symbol of everything I'd fought for, proof that courage, competence, and sacrifice should be rewarded, not punished, regardless of the gender of the person displaying them. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's about proving that you were right all along, and that the people who rejected you missed out on something extraordinary. My father had chosen pride over love, control over acceptance, reputation over family. I had chosen service over safety, truth over comfort, and justice over silence. In the end, only one of those choices led to a life worth living. The last text I received from my father came 3 months after the trial. Pointus, chose moi mas, in ma chose more mas, chose ghost chose more mas, chose more mas, comules men jednas. I'm sorry I was too late to say it when it mattered. I never replied. Some wounds heal, and some just stop bleeding. But the heroes I served with, the lives I saved, and the justice I fought for. Those things would always matter more than the approval I'd stop needing the day I learned to save lives while under fire. After all, when you've proven yourself in combat, civilian validation becomes optional.